Hello everyone! Welcome to another What I Would Have Done Thursday, and today I'm going to be briefly diving into a fantasy film that is really well known for being a bad movie. It is considered probably one of the worst out there, only because it's, I think, somehow gained a sort of similar cult recognition to the film The Room. And that film, as you can probably see by the title and thumbnail, is Trolls 2. Yep. Yeah, a sequel. And the interesting thing is even though it's marketed as a sequel, it doesn't necessarily follow the original all too well. It was just kind of something that seemed to be kind of thrown in there just for the sake of having it be sort of a sequel to another film that was titled Troll. So yeah, it definitely doesn't work to your film's advantage when you're not kind of keeping at least a certain level of consistency to what the original film was designed sort of to be. Because not only are these trolls not really called trolls within the film, I mean, they're called goblins. There's no older characters. There's no tie-in to anything really. It's almost like it's putting it out there as its own thing, even though it's supposedly somehow supposed to be connected to the original Troll film. So it kind of falls flat from the start there. So obviously what I would have done is I wouldn't have tied this film with anything in regards to the first film. I probably would have just titled it Goblins, since that's what they call them within the film, and just kind of made that its own standalone. But I understand that it was sort of done to be, again, sort of a marketing ploy to get people to go and see it, which I believe is very unfortunate, because I think, there should be a certain level of honesty as far as when you're trying to push forward a piece of material. So, but basically these goblins apparently like to eat humans, and they supposedly live in this small farming town named Nilbog. I believe that's how you pronounce it, or Nimbog. And basically, what ends up happening is the Waits family within this particular film ends up going to this farming town for sort of some kind of exchange, and they come across food that the goblins sort of have as something that when they eat it, it turns the humans into plants, and the goblins apparently are vegetarians. So that's why they turn the humans into plants, by giving them this food that turns them into plants. It's really stupid. Like, I mean, just saying this premise out loud just makes me want to like hit my head on the keyboard. Like, it's really that bad. What it really should have been is just have it be about a family that decides to go on vacation. They go to some place within the woods, and sort of do a camp out or something like that. And then the kids come across something. And that's something that they come across and that they maybe potentially mess with, like, for example, maybe a book, or some kind of flower, or something part of nature. That would probably even make sense too. Something that could be linked to maybe something fantasy oriented. Have them somehow mess with it, and this results in bringing about goblins that are maybe from like some other dimension or something like that. That would have made a little bit more sense to me than them just somehow being able to roam in this very small town with really no explanation as to how they sort of got there, or, any real understanding of the kind of universe that this film is trying to set itself up in. So I think doing it from the perspective of them being from another dimension would have made a lot more sense. And obviously, since the kids expose themselves and their family to sort of the goblins, it's really up to them to kind of uh, make sure the goblins can somehow go back to their dimension. And in doing so, they sort of save the day in a way. And at the same time, the conflict arises in the fact that obviously the parents don't believe the kids, as far as goblins existing and whatnot, and you could have played with that whole conflict as well. So there could have been a variety of angles in which they approached this, but I think had they stuck to that sort of premise in people not necessarily believing in the goblins, in particular the parents and the adults, but then the kids setting into motion the goblins existing, and then having them be the resolvers of that conflict, I think would have worked a whole lot better than this whole premise of that somehow the goblins just exist, and supposedly this grandpa who's dead is trying to warn the family about these goblins that are supposedly in this area, which again has really no sense. There's nothing that really ties anything together, so you're really left with something very thin here. So had it just been what I think should have been done, it would have, I think, lended itself to being a whole lot more consistent. And basically, another thing that really stands out within this film, as far as it being very poorly crafted, is the acting. The acting is very wooden. There's a famous part of the film where there's this guy who sees the goblins eating somebody, and he goes, "They're eating her, and then they're gonna eat me." And then he sort of goes, "Oh my God," and he just drains out this one line, or this one word out so long, and he really does not pull it off all too well at all, and it just comes off as hilarious. And I just think to myself, really, this was wow. But obviously, this wasn't one of those films that, again, had really the best going for it, really. But having that being said, I think obviously the acting needed to be improved if they really wanted us to take this film really seriously. Especially when people are supposedly dying within the film. Again, and this kind of makes me cringe a little bit because, you're supposed, especially when you're doing like these kinds of horror films. I mean, I really do prefer the ones that do treat death with a little bit more seriousness than, just, doing that very drawn out and poorly done line. So that kind of made me cringe a little. So, but at the same time, it made me laugh. So it's just all really poorly constructed. And again, these actors probably don't have anything to work with, obviously, because again, their characters are pretty wooden. But they definitely needed to do at least a better job in trying to be at least convincing. But yeah, I mean, the characters obviously needed to be way more developed and whatnot, but when you already have the acting falling flat on its face, it just goes to show that you have nothing else there for it, or there within the film to really show for the actors and the characters. And also the makeup and costuming within this film, as far as the way in which these goblins look, is very pitiful. I mean, it really looks like, they put somehow like garbage bags over, the people's faces that are supposedly supposed to be playing the goblins, and, they just it just looks so unbelievably fake. It just looks like it just came out of like some kind of crafting material, you know. It really does not look like anybody really put into any effort into trying at least making it look somewhat realistic. I mean, it looks really cookie cutter. And again, the makeup obviously doesn't help with it either. So it's really just all just poorly orchestrated as far as from an artistry perspective in the way in which these goblins look. I mean, they're not all they don't even really look all too scary at all. They don't look as intimidating as they probably should be. And that's really a problem. You know, and you have to kind of give these goblins some way in which they seem intimidating. I mean, I think obviously giving them magical powers is a good idea, but I mean, obviously having the humans eat food and then them turning into plants, I think is completely stupid. I think they should just make the goblins human eaters, or I guess cannibals, you could say, even um, something of that nature, with really no sense of anything. You know, they're just mindless monsters. You know, that would have been fine, but you have to give off the impression that they are that, and obviously here that's not taken all too seriously. Um, and I think this almost comes off as an unintentional comedy, sort of similar to The Room and how it comes off as sort of more of a comedy. And you could argue whether or not this film should exist as it is, because again, I understand the sort of cult following that it has, and that it's, you know, supposed to be kind of one of those really bad, it's enjoyable type films. But if I were to really take this film seriously, I think the things that I suggested, I think would have made it a lot stronger and would have allowed it to actually have been something a little bit more productive and actually be one to kind of take itself a little bit more seriously. I mean, it could have been, you know, it could have had maybe goofy moments or things like that. You know, you could have made it a little bit like Gremlins, a little, I guess. Um, but at the same time, you know, you gotta at least kind of know what you're doing. And here they clearly did not really know what they were doing. So it just creates one big mess. But I mean, that's honestly what I would have done. I'm more than happy to hear what anybody else has to say, and if they have any thoughts as to what they would have done with this film. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say, though. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye. There may be a delay over the weekend. I'm not entirely sure, but I'll be sure to catch up with all the videos in case that's the case. Bye-bye.